Wrapping up day 4 of SEC Football Media Days here at MarkRogersTV with Alabama in town and head coach Nick Saban, who took to the podium with an agenda in mind, not necessarily to talk about football, to talk about football issues, to talk about his personnel in particular, although he did address the questions. But he definitely wanted to talk about the broad topic of player maturity and discipline and the development of players as young men, not necessarily just as football players. He definitely wanted to talk about that, and he answered all the questions, but he focused his time on that very subject in the light of a couple arrests in the past week of Alabama football players Kenyon Drake and Jerron Reed. So I took down a few notes because I thought this was an interesting topic that Nick Saban, again, from a broad perspective, he didn't address those particular young men and their issues and their arrests over the past week, but just in general, how we should deal as college football programs, how they should deal with these young men. He made one broad scope generalization that I don't necessarily agree with. I don't disagree with it. I just don't know where the basis is. That he says, based on his observation, that the disparity in discipline and maturity is greater than it's ever been between the guys at the tail end of their college careers in football, the 20, 21, 22-year-olds, and the 17, 18-year-olds coming into the program. Now, that could speak to the lack of discipline at home now versus 20 years ago, or the lack of role models at home, the lack of a father actually in the home to raise those children. That could be part of it. It could be the breakdown of the family in society that leads to a situation where guys like Nick Saban as head football coaches are not just developing these players on the field, but they have to develop them mentally and emotionally and develop their habits of discipline just so that they can play football and do all the right things outside of football just to stay eligible to play football. So Nick Saban used a lot of terms that I don't necessarily hear out of the coach's mouth, and I don't listen to every news conference every week, but I doubt if when they're preparing for Tennessee that he's talking about love and family, talking about support and development and maturity. And he talked a lot about support and, again, used the terms love and family more than once. And talked about players needing to mature and develop, and it not necessarily being the best course of action when a player screws up to kick them off the field, kick them off the team, dismiss them from the program, and have nothing to do with them. That he's in the business of development and rehabilitation to a certain extent, and providing them with a basis to instruct them, show them, model them the right way, show them the right way to handle situations, give them an outlet to understand that they're at a time of life and they're in a position of many temptations, and what they want to do is not necessarily the best thing to do, usually isn't the best thing to do, but that they got to control those emotions, control that aggression, control whatever it is, and be able to make the right decisions toward their future. And so Nick Saban addressed that, and not necessarily, again, that he's going to be looking to kick kids out of the program, because he says there hasn't been one player that he's kicked out of his program, whether it be at Alabama, Michigan State, LSU, anywhere, that has amounted to anything. Now, I don't know if that speaks to him and that he's chosen a different path in recent years, or that speaks to the players being at the point that he kicked them out, that there was no other choice at that point, that he had given them just about as many options as he could at that particular point. Okay, what else did he focus on? Well, he focused on not necessarily the nuts and bolts of this football team and how it stacks up athletically or in regards to strategy and scheme, but in terms of the mindset. You can tell that he's very bothered by the entitlement of the football team from last year. We heard many rumors about the locker room mentality, that they just showed up, that they didn't work as hard, weren't as hungry and tenacious as former Alabama teams, and maybe that led to the demise. But again, it's one play that kept them from playing in the SEC championship game, and who knows, they might have won the whole thing. But we'll never know. They looked lousy in the Sugar Bowl against a team that struggled offensively all season in Oklahoma. So Nick Saban talked about having a different mindset, checking the ego at the door, playing for the team, not playing for the individual, and that this team needs to reestablish an identity. What's that identity? Well, he didn't go into details, but I think that Alabama identity is playing smart football, playing tough football, playing poised under pressure, playing very tenacious, very smart, fundamental football. The coach reflects the team reflects the coach, and we've seen it in the past when Alabama has been at its best, which has been most of the time since 2008. They have played just like their coaches on the sideline, with poise and focus and fundamentally correct technique football. And he didn't see it last season out of his football team. Again, he addressed the Texas situation. He said, Texas is a great place with great people, but I never really considered the job. I didn't listen to an offer. I wasn't that close to taking it. I'm at a point right now where Alabama's it. And you got to think, when you've reached Alabama, where else do you go if it's your choice? If you're Dennis Franchione, you get booted out. Of course, you've got to go somewhere else if you want to continue your career. But if you're Nick Saban and you can go anywhere, Alabama's the top of the hill, the top of the mountain, or at least right there with about 5 other schools. And where else is there to go? So I think that's one of the reasons why he says, I'm staying at Alabama. But also, he's at the point in his career where he's obviously, and he stated it here, tired of moving around. And it sounds like he regretted maybe leaving some other jobs like LSU, possibly to go to the NFL, or even Michigan State, because he said in years gone by, had I had the mindset that I have now, I was just chasing the dream, chasing the goal, chasing the more money, chasing the better job. That's not necessarily what he said, but that's what he meant. In hindsight, I would have thought more about family and happiness and peace and establishing something in one place. So maybe that meant LSU, maybe that meant Michigan State, but it definitely meant one of those two places, I would think, for Nick Saban. So he says, Alabama's, I am here, this is my job to the end. All right, again, the quarterback situation with Jacob Coker and Blake Sims, they appear to be the two battling it out. Nick Saban says it's wide open. He would not speak to the competition and says, hey, I've got to see these guys play in August, especially Mr. Jacob Coker. He talked about Lane Kiffin bringing new energy, new ideas to the offense, and the players responding. And he gave him much credit from going to the head coaching position down to an assistant's position, and how well he's responded and been able to fit into the structure there. Nick Saban makes a lot of sense when he talks about playing more conference games. And everybody's against it in the SEC except for Nick Saban, and I'm not in the SEC, but me. Because again, how do you determine who's the best team in the conference unless you play within the conference? There's not enough games. These conferences have blown out to 14 teams between the Big Ten and the ACC and the SEC. And we've got to see non-conference play, of course. So you can't play everybody anymore, and the conferences have become too big. But Nick Saban even mentioned being supportive of a 10-game schedule. Now, I would be all for that because his point is for kids to have finished a 4-year career having played every school in the SEC. That's all well and good, and he's thinking of it from that angle. I'm thinking of it from a competitive standpoint. If you're playing in the SEC or pick the conference, how do you determine a champion when you don't play 5 teams in the league and you have such a great disparity between schedules? I don't care what it means to play a difficult schedule in the SEC. I understand it's considered the best conference in college football, and the schedule can be brutal. So if you add more games, they're going to be most notably against tough competition. I get that. But it's not about strength of schedule. It's about determining the best team in the league to name a conference champion legitimately. So Nick Saban on the right track with 9 or 10 games to play in a conference season. And he's good with playing a Power 5 conference schedule. Now, nobody had the guts or thought of asking him, why are you then playing one team in a Power 5 conference. West Virginia, they're not even good. They went 2-7 in the Big 12 last season. 1 out of 4 non-conference games for Alabama this season. And check out our post on that against a Power 5 conference team. But according to Nick Saban, he would love to play nothing but Power 5 conference teams in the non-conference slate. All right, Alabama fans, I've rambled on enough about Nick Saban and Alabama. Would love to hear what you have to say about your football team and about your coach's comments right here on Mark Rogers TV.